Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance. Let's take a look at some of the stories we've been following for you today. The White House today launched a new initiative to ease the supply chain crisis. The Transportation Department will serve as a broker and provide real-time data for private companies. Did you know Congress just passed another $1.5 trillion in spending over the weekend? Well, if you didn't, you're not alone. We take a look at what's inside the bill and possibly why 19 Republican senators voted yes. The White House today warning money to fight COVID-19 is running out and is pushing Congress to approve spending billions more. And Senate Republicans are pushing a vote to end mask mandates on public transit. We have the details. Everyone says the U.S. must be more energy independent, but how? We bring you the latest debate on Capitol Hill over to drill or not to drill. President Biden today has signed the $1.5 trillion yearly spending bill. The amount is $100 billion more than the previous year. Congress passed the bill at lightning speed last week. It contains about $782 billion in defense spending and $730 billion in non-defense spending. Additionally, the bill provides almost $14 billion in aid to Ukraine.
But with this bill, we're going to send a message to the American people, a strong message that Democrats and Republicans can actually come together and get something done, right, Nance? And to fulfill our most basic responsibilities.
The White House today also launched a new initiative aiming to ease the supply chain crisis. Participating companies will exchange real-time data about cargo and containers, while the Transportation Department will serve as a broker to share the information. The supply chain issue has been fragile since the pandemic started. Now the Russia-Ukraine war and lockdowns in China are worsening the situation. In the wee hours of the morning over the weekend, Congress passed a $1.5 trillion spending bill. Joe Biden signed it into law shortly thereafter. Here to assess the implications and what might have been in the bill, we have Matt Dickerson of the Heritage Foundation. Matt Dickerson, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Matt, a massive spending bill, $1.5 trillion, was just passed by Congress over the weekend. This bill was packed with all kinds of money that won't necessarily help to fund the government. Can you help break down some of what that might be and explain what's in this bill?
Absolutely. It's $1.5 trillion worth of spending, and it's loaded up with all sorts of waste and pork projects. That's going to go to fund all sorts of things that the American people don't really want to have their tax money spent on. There's things like $1 million to go fight what they're calling racist energy systems, $1.6 million to fight shellfish equity in aquaculture. So there's all sorts of waste and terrible things in this spending bill.
Now, Matt, 19 Republican senators voted in favor of the bill. Was the $42 billion for defense spending enough to justify some of, what these other billions will be going to fund?
I don't think so. And frankly, that's just an indictment of the problems with the process of putting this bill together. They lumped all sorts of other things into this bill, including things that are important, like funding our national security and aid to Ukraine. But then they loaded it up with all sorts of waste and pork projects, things like billions of dollars for green energy, and said, you got to take it or leave it. And I think it's a terrible process.
Now, Matt, it's rare to see Republicans and Democrats coming together on much as of late, which begs the question, how swampy was this bill?
It's a complete swamp. This is a classic swamp package where they just say, you get your money to spend on what you want, and we'll spend our money on what we want. And it just grows the size and scope of government and wastes the taxpayers' money.
Now, Matt, I have to ask you, what do you think will be the net result of passing a spending bill like this with regard to the inflation that we're seeing?
And that's exactly the problem here. This is $1.5 trillion of more government spending. And that's just going to add fuel to the inflationary fire, 7.9% over the last year. And that's just going to hurt more American families.
Matt Dickerson, thank you.
Thanks so much.
The White House is warning Congress of severe consequences if they don't quickly approve billions more in pandemic relief money. And on Capitol Hill, some lawmakers are pressing the Biden administration, asking why mask mandates were extended at a time when state after state is lifting their masking requirements. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more.
At least for the next month, we will still have to wear masks on airplanes and federal transit. The government extended the mandate that was supposed to end in just a few days. Now some Republicans are voicing their criticisms.
In restaurants across the land now, without a mask, they can go to shopping centers, they can go to malls, everywhere but an airport. But according to data released by the CDC last Friday, 98% of Americans can now safely choose not to wear a mask indoors. It makes no sense to continue this.
Senator Roger Wicker and others sent a letter to President Biden requesting the administration to end the mandate, while another group of lawmakers are suing the CDC, arguing that the agency lacked the authority to issue the mandate because Congress did not first approve it. Senator Ted Cruz today calling it a political theater.
The American people should have the same mask rules that members of Congress had at the State of the Union address. Just 2 weeks ago, we saw 535 members of Congress sitting on the floor of the House. I don't think there were 5 masks among them.
And the White House today warning that the government is running out of money to respond to the pandemic. Biden's called on Congress to pass billions more to make sure the government can continue developing and stockpiling vaccines, antiviral pills, masks, and free treatment and tests, especially for uninsured people.
Melina, can you update us on how Congress is handling these 2 COVID-19 measures?
Yes, Steve. So Congress is moving forward and taking action on both of these COVID-19 measures this week. As far as mask mandates, the Senate is expected to bring to the floor a vote on a Congressional Review Act, an attempt by Senate Republicans to overturn the Biden administration's extension of the mask mandates on public transit. Now, this is likely just a symbolic move by Senate Republicans because even if they were able to get it through the Senate, it would likely not pass the Democrat-controlled House. And even if by some miracle enough House moderate Democrats did vote to get this to Biden's desk, it's unlikely that President Biden would sign off on something that would overturn his own administration's policy. And if that were to happen, then it would have to come back to Congress, and that would be a very long process. So this is likely just a symbolic move by Senate Republicans saying they're against this extension of the mask mandates on federal public transit. Now, as for the COVID response money, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says that she wants to pass at least a portion of this money by this week. The White House has requested Congress to pass over $20 billion in pandemic response money. That number was then lowered to $15 billion. So by Speaker Pelosi saying she wants to pass at least some of this funding, it's unclear the amount that she's trying to get through Congress this week. So we'll have to see how congressional leadership moves forward to fulfill President Biden's pandemic response funding request. Steve, back to you.
NTD's Melina Wisecup reporting from the Capitol. The Russian government sanctioned President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. A Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs post says that sanctions prohibiting travel to Russia and freezing assets in the country were a response to the U.S. administration's unprecedented sanctions against Russia. White House spokesperson Jen Psaki, who is also sanctioned, responded Tuesday.
Won't surprise any of you that none of us are planning tourist trips to Russia. None of us have bank accounts that we won't be able to access, so we will forge ahead.
The list includes Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley, Hunter Biden, and Hillary Clinton. A Fox News cameraman was killed in Ukraine on Monday. According to a statement by Fox News, he was killed when the vehicle he and Fox News correspondent Benjamin Hall were both riding in was struck by incoming fire. Hall survived, but was badly wounded. As gas prices soar, both sides of the aisle are now calling for energy independence, but their proposals look drastically different. NTD's Iris Tao brings us the latest debate on Capitol Hill.
The dangers of our dependence on foreign oil.
Democrats are joining Republicans' call for American energy independence. It comes amid soaring gas prices and increased uncertainty facing the country's energy and national security. But their approaches are hardly the same.
The long-term solution is that we continue a rapid and aggressive transition to renewable energy and cleaner sources of fuel.
In a presser today, a group of Democratic representatives called on the Biden administration to move away from fossil fuels, which they say have been proven unreliable in turbulent times.
Until we can shake off our reliance on fossil fuels altogether, Americans will be vulnerable to the kinds of price shocks and supply chain constraints that are hurting American families today.
But one of them did admit that we do need to produce more oil to solve the current crisis.
And so as pragmatists, as realists, we all recognize that right now, to deal with that problem, we need supply to match demand.
But some are going even further. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, which has nearly 100 lawmakers, is reportedly planning to urge President Biden this week to declare climate change a national emergency and to ban fossil fuel drilling on public lands. However, some Republicans, along with Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, are making the exact opposite call.
Immediate action item is to increase our domestic oil and gas production on both federal and non-federal lands.
They're urging the White House to restart new oil and gas leasing on federal lands. Meanwhile, the White House has blamed oil companies for not using enough drilling permits to produce more domestically. But some Republicans say it's the hostile environment created by the administration that's hindering these companies from producing more. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
About 4 miles away from the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., police have arrested a man suspected in the killings of at least 2 homeless people in Washington and New York. Nearly 2 years after the White House canceled public tours due to the pandemic, the Biden administration announced today that it will resume tours starting in April. The CCP virus is making its way through communist China in what some are calling the third wave. We have a look at what this could mean for the United States and the rest of the world. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capitol Report. I'm Steve Lance. The White House is planning to resume public tours again in April. Public tours had been canceled due to the CCP virus pandemic. The White House made the announcement on Tuesday. It will begin on Friday, April 15th, 2022, starting with the tours. The tours will initially be available from 8 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays, excluding federal holidays. All White House tours are free of charge. Public tour requests are scheduled on a first-come, first-served basis and must be submitted through a member of Congress. Wuhan coronavirus cases around the world are on the rise again. China is seeing what looks like to be a third wave of the virus as Europe is seeing cases starting to rise. What does this mean for the U.S. moving forward? We're happy to have a member of America's frontline doctors here with us to discuss. Dr. Jeffrey Barkey, thank you so much for joining us in the Capitol Report.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, Doctor, we're seeing what looks like another outbreak in China, a potential third wave. Europe is starting to see cases rise. What might this mean for the rest of the world?
Well, listen, first of all, I don't believe anything that comes out of the Chinese Communist Party in China, so we have to be very skeptical about news and information that comes to us from China. But of course, we expect variants of Delta and variants of Omicron and coronavirus to be present and likely for many, many years. The good news, though, is as each variant comes to be, we hope that it'll be less severe and less detrimental. Plus, so many people now have natural immunity and some vaccine immunity that should be at least partially protective against any variant that comes out.
So clearly the economy cannot sustain another lockdown, let alone the inevitable government money that would come to follow, further exacerbating inflation. The Biden administration knows this as well, which is arguably why they did not lock down during Omicron. What should the government's approach be if we do, in fact, start to see COVID numbers rising in the United States?
It's a great question. First of all, the lockdown should never have occurred to begin with. It was the wrong approach. Studies have shown that the lockdown and the government action on COVID was more detrimental than the virus itself. The proper approach, in my opinion, is the one put forward by the Great Barrington Declaration, J. Bhattacharya and company. And that is an idea of focused protection. We know who this virus harms, and it's not young, healthy people. This virus primarily harms older folks and those with significant comorbidities, underlying illness. Those are the folks we should be protecting and being careful. For the rest of us, we should pretty much go about our business. Many younger people have natural immunity, so they should not worry. Children do great, not just my opinion. If you look at the CDC's own data, less than 18 years old, there's been around 900 deaths over the last 2+ years. Now, while every one of those deaths, of course, is a horrible tragedy, the reality is almost every single one of those deaths in kids less than 18 years old have been in kids that have significant underlying comorbidities. We're talking about childhood cancer, blood disorders, diabetes, obesity, and so forth. Healthy kids simply do not die of COVID-19. They have a greater risk of dying in a traffic accident or from seasonal influenza. So we should be leaving our children alone. We should be not vaccinating them with an experimental vaccine. We should be not masking them. So the approach to COVID in the future should be one based on focused protection, not government intervention, not tyrannical emergency mandates, etc. Those haven't worked. They've done more harm than good.
Doctor, a group of senators just held a press conference on Capitol Hill calling for an end to the federal mandates, specifically mask mandates, when it comes to flying on airplanes. I believe it was Senator Cruz, Senator Wicker, Langford, and Hoeven. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on masking on planes or masking in general.
Well, absolutely. The science is crystal clear. Masks offer little, if any, protection against a viral respiratory illness. We've known this for decades. Early in the pandemic, every single major healthcare agency told us this. Even Dr. Fauci told us this. The New England Journal of Medicine had a long expose on the lack of efficacy in masking outside a hospital setting. I fly a lot because my kids live far away. When I get on the plane, you'll look left into the cockpit and you'll notice the pilots are not wearing masks. The only people that are mandated to wear masks are the passengers. Recirculated air in the airplane, are you telling me that the cockpit wall somehow protects the pilots? No, it's theater in the back of the plane. Masks are not effective. They should not be mandated. If an individual person chooses to wear a mask for their own beliefs or their own reason, they should be allowed to do so, but there should not be mandatory masking on airplanes or any other form of public transportation.
Dr. Jeffrey Barkey, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Part of the People's Convoy rode through Washington, D.C. on Monday. After circling D.C. for more than a week in a call to end the federal government's COVID-19 restrictions, the convoy sought to enter the city limits. Police blocked many bridges, highway exits, and city streets on Monday. According to live streams posted on social media, some trucks were able to make it into the nation's capital. Some major routes into the city were crowded. By 4:30 p.m., all freeway exit closures associated with the convoy's demonstration were lifted. Last week, the convoy met with Senators Ron Johnson and Ted Cruz on Capitol Hill to discuss the group's concerns over government restrictions encroaching on the personal freedoms of Americans. Police in Washington, D.C. have arrested a man suspected in the killings of at least 2 homeless people. The shootings took place this month in D.C. and New York while the homeless people were sleeping outside. Police arrested the suspect at about 2:30 a.m. today. This about 4 miles away from the Capitol building. Gas station surveillance video shows law enforcement officers arresting the man at a gas station. The man was identified as 30-year-old Gerald Brevard. Brevard, who lives in the Washington area, has a criminal history, which also includes an arrest for assault. They transported the suspect to the D.C. Metro Police Homicide Branch for questioning. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser and New York City Mayor Eric Adams had released photos of the suspect over the weekend. Authorities had asked the public for help and offered a $55,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction. The U.S. Coast Guard says efforts are underway to refloat a cargo ship that ran aground in the Maryland portion of the Chesapeake Bay. The vessel is part of a fleet of cargo ships owned by Taiwan-based EVERGREEN Corporation. The ship sailed over a shallow part of the Chesapeake Bay and got stuck on Sunday. The executive director of the Maryland Port Association says that efforts to free the ship have been underway since Sunday night. There have been no reports of injuries or damage to the 1,000-foot-long ship. And that's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you tomorrow.